And so let's talk about this Passover significance. You see it outlined on your slide. And we're going to deal with something called hypocrisy. And as we look at the hypocrisy of the Jews, recognize that when you're pointing that finger at somebody else, that thumb is always coming back at you. So be careful. Say amen. So this starts in verse 13, the mention of the Passover. If you notice, it says, and the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. This is one of the three mentioning of Passovers in John. I need to paint the picture of this gathering because it was one significant gathering. Some theologians say that it was upwards of over 2 million people that were gathered at this Passover. Lots of activities, lots of people. And the problem with the people was major. Why? Because people came from far and wide, and they had to pay a temple tax. Every household. But most people that were coming from long distances away were bringing in foreign currency. So they needed something called a money changer to convert the foreign currency to local currency so they could pay. Plus, there was an issue of people wanting to offer sacrifices. But the people came so far away, they may not have wanted to bring all of these animals from these long distance locations with them because it may have been very burdensome and it could slow them down. But there's even a greater issue and a bigger problem. The priest determined if the animals were acceptable for sacrifice. So imagine you came all the way from California with your animals for sacrifice, only for the priest to say they're unacceptable. There's no guarantee that they would say they're acceptable. So the easiest thing to do was to bring your money and buy an animal locally, instead of bringing your beast. As one person said, when you're in the world, you brought your own bottle. In this context, you brought your own beast. And this is what happened, and that's why I gave you a picture of the court, of the outer court. They called the outer court the court of the Gentiles. If you look a little close on that handout, you'll see it labeled. It's called the Herod's Temple, and it says the motto of that temple, and you'll notice on the outside there's something called the court of the Gentiles. Why is this court of the Gentiles so important? And now we're getting into the significance of why Jesus was furious. The outer court, or the court of the Gentiles, was the only place that the Gentiles could go. They couldn't go into the inner court. That was the closest place they could get to the inner court. And African Americans can identify with this, because you know how it was for us. You couldn't eat and on the counter in the restaurant. You couldn't go to any bathroom, and you certainly couldn't get on the bus unless it was the back of the bus. And so you can say the outer court was like the back of the bus. And so if you were a Gentile, they called them God-fearers, you can come to the outer courts and pray and worship and offer your sacrifices, but no further. But get this, the Jews decided that they would set up a market for the money changers in the outer court, because you may not have been acceptable to go into the inner court, but your money is acceptable. So we'll take your money, but we won't let you come into the inner court to worship. But we'll put all the money changers and all the folks that want your cash all out there in the outer court. I told you it's over 2 million people. There's a lot of money to be made here. Say amen. So they're selling animals left and right. And not only was all this selling going on, but it was right in the midst of the place, the only place that the Gentiles could worship. So imagine you're in worship service on Sunday and somebody's got a cash register sitting up here selling you Bibles and you trying to worship. What disrespect. That's why your handout speaks to hypocrisy revealed.